As we just kind of conclude a little this afternoon, I would just echo what David's saying. And, it's great that we're here. It's great that this is the first time this kind of gathering is happening. And communication is the most important part of all relationships. So communicate with the folks in your diocese. If something was great about today, let them know. If something wasn't, or you want something more, let them know. As I had a brief opportunity to work with those that are working in the diocese, you've got a great team of people who really do care about the ministry, they care about you. And like I was saying earlier, I feel like this could be a real springtime, a turning point for your diocese. You clearly have a great shepherd, who has a heart to share the gospel. So it is in community that we can get things done. It's so easy to feel isolated. But even being isolated, the Lord can do amazing things. I don't know if you know this guy. His name is Venerable Jan Tyranowski. He's a weird-looking dude. He looks a little eccentric. Actually, he was. He was in Poland in the 1930s, 1940s. He was supposed to be an accountant, but he couldn't hack it in his studies, so he became a tailor when his father died, because his father was a tailor. And he was at a parish called St. Stanislaus in Krakow. And this was during the time when the Germans occupied Poland. St. Stanislaus was a Salesian parish, and very slowly, but somewhat methodically, priests kept disappearing from Poland as the Nazis would take them away. So the Salesians were a little bit concerned about this, and one of them reached out to Jan to say, hey, could you do some youth ministry in our parish? Jan was single. He was known to be a bit of a loner. People described him as eccentric. Maybe he wasn't like the perfect example of somebody that you'd want in charge of your youth program. And, and this was also very unusual in the 1940s, when there was an attitude that, clergy did everything. But they reached out to Jan, and Jan started meeting with 15 young men in the parish, doing some spiritual studies. He was especially excited about St. John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. The young men in his program said that they were a little bit put off by him. He was fairly intense. He was very awkward, but he was constant. And in fact, one of the members of the group, Mrs. Minisky, said that they were all skeptical about his eccentric nature, but they came to accept him as somebody genuine and had deep and insightful things. That his influence was huge on them. Actually, two of the young men in that youth group became priests. One of them was this guy, Mislav Minisky, and the other was a young man who had just lost his father and was really grieving, trying to figure out his place in the world. He thought maybe he would go into acting, but through working with Jan, realized the call to the priesthood. That, of course, was Carol Wojtyla, who became St. John Paul II. And so I shared a story with Venerable Jan for you as an example of a random person who didn't really have the skill set, but said yes. And what the Lord did, when he was named servant of God, Pope John Paul II said to him, he was one of those unknown saints, hidden amid the others like a marvelous light at the bottom of life at a depth where night usually reigns. He disclosed to me the riches of his inner life, his mystical life, in his words, in his spirituality, and his example of a life given to God alone. He represented a new world that I did not yet know. I saw the beauty of a soul opened up by grace. And that was his witness. Now, we know of him because one of the people in his youth group was John Paul II. But whether or not John Paul II was in the group, he was still a holy guy, and he still had a profound influence on all of those people in a very difficult time. And so I always think of him as a great example of the ministries that we often find ourselves in. Somebody taps us on the shoulder, asks us to do something. In his own lifetime, I mentioned he had a number of sicknesses. He died at around the age of 40, a few months after John Paul was ordained as a priest. He passed away. So here's a guy that never really saw a lot of fruit, so to speak, the work that he did, but God certainly had a plan for him and a plan for the church, and has a plan for you. And I think hidden, I think John Paul II said he was a hidden saint. I think there's a lot of hidden saints, and praise God for that. And we want to be that hidden saint. We're not going to get a lot of attention, a lot of glory, a lot of notoriety in our lives, but it's in the way that we love people, in the way that we can witness the soul opened up with grace. And that can really be transformative in the ministry that we get to do. You just never know. You just never know. I really enjoyed a number of you people that were in the 90s and were at Attleboro and, still having fond memories of it. You just never know. It's such an honor for me to be like, oh, wow, that's cool. That's great to be part of your story and be part of that ministry. And for all of us, we just keep our eyes fixed on the Lord, and we have a hope and a confidence in the power of the gospel. In terms of ministry and others. I just have two things that I wanted to share with you in closing, just ways to think, because I know this was the first of its kind, this pastoral leaders council, and I thought there might be a few things worth discussing amongst yourselves in terms of, particularly those of you who are in larger parishes, or certainly with those of you who are in more collaborative work with other parishes. Some of this is reflecting from some conversations that I've been honored to be a part of with the USCCB and looking kind of big picture at ministry. But when it comes to, the lay life, the lay formation, it really does seem to be that there's three major, kind of ministry movements that are happening. You've got family ministry, which includes children. You have youth ministry, which is typically junior high and high school. And then you have young adult ministry, which is college. And the way the bishops define it is it's really into, kind of like 18 into the 30s is young adult ministry. No one's exactly sure when you stop being a young adult and then you start being an adult. Most adults don't want to admit that they are, in fact, adults. They'd rather be young adults. That's okay. We're not going to start something about it. But I have these three up here because, and you'll notice the little diagram here, the way they connect. There might be different delineations of how these categories fit in, and I know there's different vocabulary in every diocese and how it works. But really, this movement, one of the obvious statements is a family produces children who become young people, who become young adults, who start their own families that produce children who become young people, right? Like there's that circle of it, and really thinking holistically as a parish, how might we be all working together in these various ministry spheres? How might we have a good handoff to each other in terms of helping somebody on the journey to discipleship? Where might we put our efforts where it's most lacking, or where it might be the most valuable? I know Bishop was mentioning just how important it is, the family. And intentionally put family at the bottom because the family is really the foundation of ministries in the life of a parish. It's been noted that one of the reasons why so many Catholic teens and young adults aren't active in their faith, it ties right back to the fact that their families aren't active in their faith. There's a phrase, a rising tide, lifts all ships. And so I think the successful efforts at any one of these benefit the other two, especially if there's a good collaborative sense with each other. Now, you might look at this and say, we're not doing any of them, right? Sometimes that can be the case. I think a case could be made of these three groups. I think some of the easiest, and I don't think any of it's easy, maybe the most accessible might be youth. And I know a lot of dioceses and a lot of parishes have been able to think of a way to revive their parish because, sometimes married couples, they're busy, they've got two jobs, they're running all over the place. Young adults, they're somewhat scattered to the wind, but we know the high school these teens are going to. We might have sacramental preparation programs that can get them together. But again, it's not just thinking of how do we reach young people, but it's how, if that's our strategy, how might what we do with youth impact the rest of it? How can we, through young people, meet their parents and serve and meet with young people that might let us build relationships with the parents? How might we keep in contact with those young people when they go off to college? That can build a relationship with young adults. And as David was saying, like, the culture won't change overnight. You almost want to think in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, what can we be doing? But a big thing is that it has to be done together. Sometimes we can feel isolated and we can even feel siloed from each other in terms of ministry. And that's why gathering together like this on a regular basis is really key, not just something that would, inspire you to move forward, but again, more collaboration. And even more, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Pope Benedict talked about co-responsibility. There's a beautiful phrase because he said, in terms of the laity working with the clergy, that he actually said collaboration makes it sound like the clergy is leading it and the laity are just working alongside. The idea of co-responsibility really says we all have a stake. As I look out here, laity, right? Like, this is it. Like, we should feel responsibility for young people and young adults in our parish, even if they're not our home, and for families in our parish and those who are married. And I know I'm speaking a little bit to the choir here, but I also want to help the choir sing better. And singing better means we're in harmony, and harmony means we're using the same notes and we're all working with each other. So I hope one of the fruits of today, and even after I finish my talk, and we have a little bit of discussion amongst yourself, is just to say, like, how are we helping people on the journey to discipleship? Maybe we can't do all three at once. Maybe we're going to focus on one. What are we doing well? How can that benefit the others? Those are the kind of continual conversations you just need to keep having in terms of that. But I like this because it makes it a little bit more simple. There can be like 30 different ministries that fall into these categories, but at least this makes it go, oh, okay, yeah, that's not as difficult as sometimes we make it out to be, in terms of the stand things. The other thing I just wanted to reflect on a little bit was some components of ministry that are a reflection, a lot of some of the language that John Paul II used and Benedict used and Pope Francis used. So the picture I have behind me is of a monstrance. And I think that's beautiful in the sense that this is, during the time of Eucharistic revival and Eucharistic awareness. And I blew it up bigger over here because I was afraid that was too small, but this is a massive TV, so I don't have to worry about that at all. And I just want to go through these components of ministry. Another opportunity to have conversations with each other. In 1996, the U.S. bishops produced a document called Renewing the Vision, and it talked about some components of youth ministry. This is a little bit based on that, but it's expanded to not just be about teenagers, but just be about ministry in general. And it highlights some of what I was saying earlier in regards of the way that we might think to communicate better and collaborate better. David again mentioned changing culture. It said that social engineering begins with verbal engineering, which is to say we change the way we talk about things, and that actually changes culture. Now, we see this happen in very negative ways in our secular culture, the way like words get hijacked and they get changed. We can't say things in a certain way because it means something. But there's a positive way of it too, which is to say that if we can find the right words to say and use the right words with each other, we're immediately communicating with each other better. We're immediately able to establish a vision. And so I propose these words that the church uses quite a bit as an opportunity for collaboration with each other. And as I go through them, hopefully they'll just make a little bit more sense. So the monstrance itself, that's holding that's holding all of this, I would refer to that as a way of loving accompaniment, because all ministry is done through relationship, and it's never done outside of a relationship. In fact, when you look at the incarnation was Jesus coming in, the second person of the Trinity, coming into our culture, coming into our world, and walking with us. And it's in walking with us that we really recognize who he is. That beautiful image of the road to Emmaus, which is such a profound catechetical image, where Jesus is walking with his disciples and listening to them, wanting to hear them share their experience. I think that's an important part of listening that sometimes people misunderstand. When we talk about like listening to young people, some people take it to an extreme of like, oh, we're going to listen to how they want to change church teaching or other stuff. It's like, we want to listen to their experience. We want to listen to their understanding. I mean, imagine the patience of Jesus walking with the disciples. The disciples are telling Jesus about what he just went through. Like, he was definitely the expert on the subject in that conversation, but in humility, he just let them share, because he wanted to hear what their perspective of the crucifixion was. I bet they got details wrong. He might have been tempted, one of them might have been like, oh, right, and they took Jesus and they whipped him 38 times, and Jesus was like, 39. Yes, continue, please. Right? But he did it, and even was willing to walk with them for a distance going the wrong direction, so that he could open up the scriptures to them, and they would recognize it in the breaking of the bread. That's the language of accompaniment. You might have heard in the newspaper that the Vatican just came out with a document. I don't know if it's officially published in English yet, about marriage. And it uses a beautiful phrase. It uses the phrase actually charismatic accompaniment. And I think that's a powerful word based on what we were sharing earlier. It's not accompaniment just for the sake of going in the wrong direction. There's a goal there. There's a purpose, and the purpose is to share Christ, to offer Christ, to make an invitation to be a disciple of Jesus Christ, which isn't manipulative. It's because we love them and we know that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And we want them to know who Jesus is and see in our own lives an enthusiasm and a joy that really is only about through the gospel. So if anything holds it all together, it's that idea of loving accompaniment, charismatic accompaniment. And I think that's a big challenge. If our only interaction with young people might just purely be more classroom environment. And I think there's ways to change that. I think there might be opportunities within your parish to offer more social opportunities. I think it's always great if you know a young person is at an event or doing something and you go there, they're like, oh my gosh, why are you here? Because I care for you. Like, it says something so much more. If we can, it's harder for us. But even if we can just find ways to go out of the ordinary, to let them know that you really care for them beyond whatever the catechetical situation is, that can be really transformative in people's lives. At the heart of it, of course, is Jesus, and everything is about Jesus. The faith is Christocentric. I actually like thinking of it as Jesus-centric, because Christ is a title, but Jesus is his name. And it's the name above name. The letter of Philippians says that Jesus' name, every knee will bow, every tongue will proclaim that Jesus Christ is Lord. Jesus is a powerful name. We should use it more. There's a reason why Jesus is known as a swear word, because there's a power to the name, my name is Bob. Bob has no power, I know your stuff or something. Look. And even if people don't know Jesus, they can tell like that name means something different. And our faith is about the who, it's not a what. I'm actually quite convinced that one of our biggest issues in faith formation is we spend more time talking about what God wants of us than who God is. And Jesus is the image of the invisible God. We want to help them fall more deeply in love with Jesus. That's at the goal of everything we do. And the best way to do that is in the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are short. They're surprisingly short. God's so good that he didn't give us 20 Gospels, none of us would read them. If there's one takeaway from today that I encourage you all to do, if you haven't done this ever, or maybe haven't done it in a while, read the Gospel from beginning to end. When you read it from beginning to end, you really start to see Jesus' personality. If your only encounter of the Gospels is just maybe liturgy, even as a homilist, I find I do this. You're tempted just to make points out of the stories. but you don't necessarily get into who is Jesus. You know, what makes him happy, what makes him angry, what makes him sad. You know, and all of those things that this is the one we're following. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, read those. I mean, just read them. I'll throw this out there too, just to really encourage you. You know, I assume you all want to go to heaven and be with the saints and angels. You know, someday you're going to meet Saint Luke, and it's going to be super awkward if you haven't read his book. And eternity awkwardness is forever. So, yes, we do it out here. I'll journey. You know, just feel that way. I mean, that's actually a good reason to read all of the Bible. You know, like how many people in heaven are already trying to talk to me? You know, it's also in your conference. You did every time in 3 chapters. So it's about Jesus, and I would say the Gospels, and I think sharing the Gospels. You know, one blessing I had when I was younger was I got involved in a group called Young Life, which was evangelical Protestants, and all they ever did was read the Gospel. And it was fascinating. You know, for everything there's a gospel story because everything is about Jesus. Right? So I think we just need to be thinking more gospel. I mean, our liturgy does it, right? You never have a liturgy never skips gospel, right? And so I think in the way we pass on the faith, it's good to model that pattern in the liturgy. It's when we open up the scriptures, he can be recognized in the breaking of the bread, which is why the liturgy of the word always precedes the liturgy of the Eucharist. And I would say in a similar way in our faith formation, that liturgy of the word, our breaking open of the word, particularly as it's expressed in Scripture, is a beautiful way for them to experience Jesus in their life, in sacraments, in service, in what have you. So Jesus is at the center, and then there's 7 words that go around here, and I just want to briefly reflect on them. And maybe use this even as, you know, one of the things I'd like to talk about afterwards is maybe just to say, which of these are we doing well? And which of these can we work harder? You know, in terms of respective ministries. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of different ministries here. So some of your ministries may be focused more on one than the other, which is another opportunity to collaborate with another ministry that does well with the other, because they all really need to be there in order to help somebody become a joyful missionary disciple of Jesus Christ. Let's begin with this idea of missionary. Are we a church that goes out to people? I think we're not sometimes. I think that's a real challenge for us. You know, I did part of my PhD was actually a study of evangelization, Catholic evangelization in the U.S. and it was a short study. But one of the issues is that I think that still plagues us a little bit in the United States is that Catholicism does not come to the U.S. because of evangelization. It came because of immigration. And it still continues to do so. One of the only reasons why our numbers aren't plummeting is because we're getting people from the Philippines, we're getting people from Mexico, we're getting people, you know, from other Catholic countries and Catholic cultures, you know, Portugal, right? All of these cultures, and they're bringing Catholicism with them, which is beautiful. The downside is that many of us don't have a missionary imagination when it comes to being Catholic. We actually don't naturally think we should go out and share the Catholic faith to people who aren't Catholic, because our experience has been so cultural and so familial. Again, not a bad thing, but it hampers us, I think, from thinking more big picture. You know, I teach at Franciscan, and, you know, I get to teach with, you know, amazing people like Scott Hahn and John Bergsman and others. And, you know, it's very interesting to me that the Catholic converts are the most passionate speakers of Catholicism, because they want to go out and they want to tell people about it, because they have an experience of not being Catholic. Sometimes they have an experience of being in another church. Sometimes they have an experience of just being lost. And I think sometimes we forget, like, there are people who are lost. You know, when I think of like youth ministry, for example, you know, sometimes I've spoken to diocesan parish councils, and somebody said, well, you know, our families are pretty strong, and I don't think we need youth ministry. And I would say, well, I said, there's sadly a way that youth ministry is being done that is trying to make up the things they're not getting in their family. But all things being equal, even if families were rocking, you still need youth ministry. Because A, those kids need to be supported, but B, there's a lot of families out there who, those kids are growing up without any faith, without any church. And we want to be missionary, we want to go. That was probably a shocking statement of Jesus at the end of the Gospel of Matthew. He told them, go and make disciples of all nations, not stay and announce it in the bulletin. And so we need to be thinking, how do we go and proclaim the gospel? How are we leading? How are we missionary? Sadly, sometimes our jobs, for those of you that work full time, we can really overburden people with so many administrative duties, and we don't have, again, an imagination that support more missionary movements. But just asking the question, what are we doing to get out there, and share the gospel, particularly with people that might not know. Humanitarian, this is a really big one. And I think it's something that is easy to overlook. We can kind of think to ourselves, well, that's social services, that's somebody else. But if we're not ministering to people's felt needs, we'll never be able to minister to their deeper spiritual needs. I think of an example like this. Let's say you broke your leg and you go to the ER and they do an x-ray and you notice something weird, so they do a CAT scan and they find you've got cancerous tumor. And so the doctor comes in and he wants to explain to you about how serious the cancer is and what needs to be done to fix that. But meanwhile, your leg is still broken and nobody's set the bone or giving you any medicine to deal with it. All you're thinking about is how much your leg hurts. You can't deal with a bigger problem. Your leg hurts. You need someone to help that. That's the immediate felt need. And I think sometimes because we are spiritual people and we know they need Jesus more than anything, we want to just jump right to the spiritual. But this person is lonely. This person doesn't have a job. This person has a lot of felt needs that if we don't just actually look at the person and say, like, what do you need? How can we help you with that? That's the beginning of ministry. They're not going to be able to do the philosophical and the spiritual if we're not really dealing with the natural. So how might we in our ministries just be more humanitarian in the way we see people that we're ministering to, maybe crises that they're a part of? With young people, there's a mental health and anxiety epidemic, that's going on. How can we help that? What can we do to help that? Communal. We are a community that goes forth. It is an idea that we are all doing this together, that it's not, Christianity isn't just a lone ranger saying, I'm going to be a disciple. It's being a son and daughter of God, brothers and sisters with each other. Communal means that we start with the family. How might we foster faith more deeply in the family? And I love the Latino concept of familia, which isn't just a translation of the word family. Many times, at least in Anglo cultures, there's a sense that the family is like a mom, dad, and kids. And familia is a wider understanding of the community of faith. And again, this idea that it takes a village to raise a child, so to speak, right? It takes a church to raise a disciple. That we're working together and we're having opportunities to be a part of a community and to allow people to share their gifts in the context of that community. This is the journeying with, the journeying together. Pope Francis has a beautiful image of Jesus with the community of Nazareth on the way to the temple back and forth. That idea of people going together and this idea that we're all on the journey of missionary discipleship. How might we enhance that? And if they're involved in one ministry, how can they see that reflected in others that are a part of it? I won't say much more about charismatic, except I mentioned it earlier, and it really is a bedrock of what we're doing. So the order isn't really a specific order, but that charismatic is kind of at the bottom of the foundation is really essential in terms of this is what everything is pointed to, this is what everything is unpacking, this is what everything is celebrating. It's catechetical. Catechetical is another word that I think we don't fully grasp the meaning of. The church is trying to help us understand that. One of my favorite quotes of St. John Paul II is that the definitive aim of catechesis is to put people not only in touch with, but in intimacy, in communion with Jesus Christ. Catechesis is training for discipleship. There's an educational component to catechesis, to be sure, and that's an important part. Just like in any relationship, there's an educational component. When you start dating somebody that you care about, you ask questions. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your life, right? The more that we're able to know about somebody, the more deeply we're able to love them. And that's the case with catechesis. But it is that idea of it's always being channeled towards discipleship. It's always being put into practice. The 4 pillars of catechism are creed, sacraments, morality, and prayer. And I think of those 4, prayer gets the least attention, but deserves the most. Because like teaching people how to pray is a catechetical endeavor. And if you haven't read the catechism section on prayer, it is mind-blowingly good. It's short and it's sweet. It's actually the first magisterial document ever written about prayer in the history of the Catholic Church. And it's absolutely worth reading. I encourage you to read all the catechism as catechists, but it can be a little bit dense at times. Read the entire prayer section. And then I would also encourage you, if you haven't, at the end of every section is an in-brief. There's 52 in-briefs in the whole catechism. If you did one in-brief a day and took it to prayer, in about 2 months, you would have prayed over the entire cause of faith, and your life would change. It's really going to be profound. And you're going to have a lot more insights as to how to share it or everything connects. So that's catechetical. Sacramental. It's almost a little weird to separate sacramental from catechetical because everything's sort of beautifully connected. But the goal of catechesis is that they would really be truly living out the sacraments. That we would be a people of the sacraments. As I mentioned earlier, God comes to us in the flesh. God uses physical matter to connect with us, and He's still doing that in the sacraments. I think I could bear hope for anybody that we pass the faith on to, that if they can learn to encounter Jesus in the sacraments, they can go anywhere in the world and still keep their faith alive because they recognize Christ there. And finally, vocational. One of the beautiful things of the Synod on youth, the faith, and vocational discernment was Pope Francis was really encouraging a wider understanding of vocation than just purely priesthood or religious life. Our first vocation, a vocation is called from God. Our first vocation is to holiness. That's where it always begins. That we hear an invitation to be a friend of Jesus, to be a disciple of Jesus before all else. And all of our other vocations flow from that. And we have many vocations with which we live. The word vocation is based on the word vocare, which means to call. But that's also based on the word voice, which is to speak. And so there's this reciprocal nature of a vocation, which is God calls us, and we speak back. And particularly with young people, it's beautiful to help them find their voice, to help them find their charisma, to help them find their giftedness that they can give to the world. And I think the bigger fulfillment of that is in sacraments of service, which in marriage or holy orders, or in consecrated life, religious life, whatever that might be. But all ministry actually needs to be thought of, Pope Francis says, in terms of vocation, helping them first understand the invitation to be a friend of Jesus, a disciple of Jesus, and what are their gifts and what are their calls. And part of vocation means that we're trying to get them plugged into opportunities to use their gifts and to use their characters, to help them find for themselves who God made them to be and how they are called to live that out. Now, there's one more thing which surrounds the whole circle here, because I know many of you are dealing with younger people, but it's youthful. And, I love what Pope Francis talked about how Jesus himself would be considered a young adult, in terms of the ministry that he did. We're not trying to make somebody something they're not. We want to reach them where they're at. We want to, if they're young, we want them to be a joyful young disciple of Jesus Christ, for example. Are we reflecting the faith in a way that they don't feel like they should, they're far behind because they're 2 decades younger? We just want to let them grow in the faith that God is calling them to grow. And so depending on your ministry, youthful may not apply, but I think it always applies. Because I love how in the scriptures, the same word for new is also young. And, so Jesus is ever new, Jesus is ever young. And it's that idea that there's a youthfulness that belongs to all of us who are disciples of Jesus Christ. No matter what our ages, we can be 70 or 80, but there's a youthfulness that inspires a disciple of Jesus. A joy and energy, a vitality, a lot of the positive things that we would say about ministry with young people that should review all of the various elements of ministry that we have. So this big picture then is something I put together in hopes that might be a good conversation piece, which is to say, how might we in all of our ministries, I think in every ministry you've got to have all of this. You might have some more predominant than others, but something is there. But certainly in the formation of people, whether they be families, whether they be young people, whether they be young adults, we want to find a way to give this totality of ministry, this totality of ideas. And so now I'm just going to leave it to you and allow, it's conversation time, right? Is that a nice thing? At your own tables, and particularly if you're sitting with people that you do ministry with or collaboration with, I'd love you just to reflect on what you just heard. And answer the question, first of all, of what you see here, what is being done really well? And of what you see here, what do you need to maybe focus on? What might you need more help with? The goal is that we're working together with an interconnected net, which we can draw in families and youth and young adults. And so, using this as a guide, let's just say a prayer. Holy Spirit, we just ask you to anoint and bless the conversations that my brothers and sisters are about to have, that it would bear fruit, and that it would help them be that much more effective of leading people to your heart. And we ask this through Christ, our Lord. Amen. So let's have